Every now and then, a single discovery comes along that just completely unravels everything we thought we knew about our own story. I mean, a place so old and so totally unexpected that it forces us to basically tear up the textbooks and start all over again. Today, we are digging into one of those places, Göbekli Tepe. And this discovery, it really forces us to ask a super fundamental question. What drives human civilization? I mean, is it our stomach or is it our soul? For more than a century, the answer everyone accepted was pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But Göbekli Tepe? Well, it suggests that we might have had the answer completely backwards the whole time.
Yeah, for decades, the official story of how civilization began, the one championed by archaeologist V. Gordon Childe, was called the Neolithic Revolution. And look, it was a simple, common sense idea. It's probably the one you and I learned back in school. The whole thing boiled down to one simple premise: survival came first. So the old model, it was super simple, super linear. Here's how it supposedly went. Step 1, humans figure out farming. Step 2, that allows them to stop wandering and settle down into permanent villages. And only then, after their stomachs were full and they had a reliable food surplus, only then could they afford the so-called luxuries of a complex society. Things like art, social structures, and organized religion. It was a stomach-first model of history. But then archaeologists found something that just didn't fit, not at all. Okay, so now let's get into how this entire, long-held theory gets completely turned on its head. We're headed to southeastern Turkey, to a discovery that just shatters that established timeline. So back in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt, who has since passed away, revisited this site. Now, this place had been dismissed decades earlier as nothing special. But what he found, well, it wasn't a military outpost or some old graveyard. No, it was something far, far older and just impossibly grand for its time. And when I say old, I mean we are talking about 12,000 years old. Just let that number sink in. It's an age that's so staggering, it's actually hard to wrap your head around. This wasn't just old, this was from an entirely different chapter of the human story, a chapter we didn't even know existed. Okay, to really put this into perspective for you, Göbekli Tepe was built around 9,600 BCE. That is more than 1,000 years before widespread agriculture even began. It's a mind-boggling 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza was built and 6,000 years before Stonehenge. It is, by a massive margin, the oldest known piece of monumental architecture on the entire planet. So who built this absolute masterpiece? Well, the answer is the real shocker. It was hunter-gatherers. Yeah, the very same people we once pictured as just small nomadic bands constantly on the move, just trying to survive. These people hadn't invented pottery yet. They hadn't tamed animals, and most importantly, they had not yet figured out farming. And that, right there, raises two massive questions. How, and even more importantly, why did they build it? Well, the why seems to come down to one of humanity's oldest and most cherished traditions: getting together for a massive party. This is what's known as the feasting theory. The idea is that the desire to hold these huge communal gatherings and ritual feasts was the main motivation. Think about that. The temple wasn't built because they had a surplus of food. It's that people had to actually invent a surplus of food, that is agriculture, in order to keep building the temple and keep these massive feasts going. And the physical evidence to back this up? It's pretty compelling. Archaeologists have found these enormous limestone vats and troughs that were carved right into the bedrock of the site. I mean, some of these things could hold up to 240 liters. And get this, analysis suggests they weren't for storing water. Nope, they were for brewing. Yeah, when they analyzed the animal bones and plant remains, it painted this incredible picture of what these feasts were like. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of bones from wild game like gazelle, boar, and aurochs, which were a type of massive wild cattle. They were also gathering wild grains like incorn wheat and barley, plus nuts like pistachio and almond. And of course, there was something special to drink. This is just incredible. Chemical analysis of the residue left inside those giant vats revealed something called oxalates. Now, that's a telltale byproduct you get when you ferment grain into beer. This is the oldest solid evidence of beer making anywhere in the world. They were brewing beer 12,000 years ago, and it was probably a pretty important social lubricant, not to mention a calorie-rich drink for all the workers and worshippers. And the roots of this tradition run so deep. It's actually astounding. So what you're seeing on the left is one of those ancient vats from Göbekli Tepe. And on the right, that's a traditional stone vat called a shura, which is still used for fermenting grape juice in that very same region today. It's literally a 12,000-year-old cultural echo. Just amazing. So, when you put all of this evidence together, it points to a radical, completely new story of civilization. A story that doesn't start with the stomach, but instead with the human spirit. This is what we can call the Great Reversal. The old story, the one we all learned, said that the economy, farming, came first, and that created the stability for belief systems and temples to show up later. Göbekli Tepe flips that script completely on its head. It shows that a shared belief, a shared idea came first. That belief led people to build these incredible temples. And then the social and logistical needs of running those temples, that's what created the economy of farming. So here's how the new sequence of events seems to work step by step. First, you have an idea, a shared belief system that brings all these different hunter-gatherer groups together. Second, that belief motivates them to take on this enormous project of building a central temple for rituals and social gatherings. Third, to make those gatherings happen, they needed to hold these massive feasts. And finally, fourth, the constant pressure to reliably feed hundreds of builders and participants. That's what drove the invention of agriculture. In a very real sense, the temple built the farm. I love how the French archaeologist Jacques Covin put it. He said this was a revolution of symbols before it was a revolution of agriculture. In other words, humanity first had to change its mind, change its whole perception of the world. And only then did we go on to change the world itself. But of course, the story doesn't just end there. Like any truly great scientific discovery, Göbekli Tepe raises just as many questions as it answers. And believe me, the debate is very much alive. Right now, the big debate is this. What exactly was Göbekli Tepe? The original discoverer, Klaus Schmidt, he pictured it as a pure ritual site, a kind of cathedral on a hill that people would travel to but not live at. But the current lead archaeologist, Dr. Lee Clare, well, he's putting forward evidence for a whole different take, that this was a bustling, permanently occupied settlement, a place where daily life and ritual were completely intertwined.
So what's the new evidence for that idea? Well, for one, they found a really sophisticated system of huge cisterns and channels that were carved to collect rainwater, something you'd absolutely need for a permanent settlement. They've also found thousands of grinding stones, way more than you'd need for just a few big parties, which suggests people were preparing food there every day. And the tools they're finding aren't just ceremonial objects, they're for everyday tasks like leatherworking and woodwork. And this place just keeps delivering surprises. I mean, just recently, the team unearthed a life-sized human statue. Now, this is a huge deal because for years, all the art found at the site was thought to be about these powerful, sometimes menacing animals. Finding this statue suggests a more human-centric view of the universe might have been emerging, adding this whole new, fascinating layer to their belief system. And all of this leaves us with a final, really big thought. For so long, we've defined early humans purely by their struggle for survival. But Göbekli Tepe suggests that maybe our first great coordinated act as a species wasn't driven by survival at all, but by a search for meaning. That it wasn't about feeding our stomachs, but about feeding our souls. And if that's the case, what other fundamental things have we been getting wrong about ourselves?